Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Lote Lino Wash Process Panama from Say Coffee. There's the box right there. And Say, based out of Brooklyn, New York. And for anybody that does not know, washed Panamanian geishas are my favorite coffee in the entire world. And not only is this a washed Panamanian geisha, but it comes from my favorite farm in the entire world, the legendary Hacienda La Esmeralda farm. So as soon as I saw Say release this coffee, it's one that immediately caught my interest and attention, as well as the attention of a lot of you guys as well, as we received a lot of requests as to whether we were going to be reviewing this coffee. And we reviewed Say's Esmeralda coffee last year, the Lote Tumaco, which turned out to be one of my favorite coffees of the entire year, as it finished second place in our top 10 coffees of 2021 list. So it's safe to say the expectations for this coffee were very high, as this right here is day 47. And recipe we went with for this coffee. So we were able to find Say's brew guide, which translates to a 17:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's what this cup right here is made with. And we tried it on a couple of days here in these notes as well. However, I actually like this coffee best with our standard recipe, which is a 16:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I liked it best through the Chemex, which of course would indicate a more medium grind. Now, roast profile for this coffee, Say is notorious for being a very light roasting coffee roaster, and this one is no exception, as I feel like by most metrics and standards, you would say that this one skews on the very light side of things. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. First impression, and the thing I took away was the wonderfully clean base, which was very much expected given what this cup is. However, at the forefront of this coffee was a lot more of a fruit-like component as opposed to a floral component, which I might have expected some more florality to the cup. However, the listed passion fruit that they had on here was very much on point, as that really dominated this first impression of this cup. And given just how clean the base was, it really did shine and accentuate that profile within it. Florality was also in high measure, as there was a slight grain component, but the cup in general was a lot more sweet than expected. So that left a pretty nice first impression. Day 25. Ran it through the April dripper, and it was another really nice day of this coffee, as this one skewed slightly more on the floral side of things than the previous day had. However, the tropical component was still the most defining factor of this coffee, as it continues to remain wonderfully tropical all around, still the most defining factor to it. Day 28, ran it through the Chemex for the first time, and it's the best it had been up to that point, and I kind of attributed that to the rest period that it had. Here we are at the 4-week mark, and at this time it's the most sweet and most defined that it had been to this point. Tropical component is now complemented by a slight citric profile to the cup, while the flavor profile within it remains very pronounced as well as defined, as again that passion fruit is just really, really well defined in this coffee. Day 31, up to the temperatures. So I was playing around with the Say recipe that we did have. I ran it through the V60, and interestingly, it felt a little bit more thin and hollow, so I felt maybe going a little bit more fine on this would have fixed that a little bit, but the tropicals were bright, just not quite as sharp, not quite as well defined. It does open up a little bit as it cools down, but at this time it's a little bit more of this kind of herbal citric component. I do have a bergamot listed on here, so that would make a lot of sense. It's a little bit more of that kind of grainy, like complexity to the cup, but not in the positive fruity pebble-like manner that I typically like and associate with these coffees. Day 34, reduced the temperatures once again to maybe see if I could get a little bit more of those defined tropical components back, and many of the floral aspects are here present in a little bit more subtle of a manner. So those earlier first 3 days were the best days I had experienced up to this point, as it's a little too delicate and it's kind of contrasting to the brightness that I'm experiencing from it. Grainy citric aspects are in the cup yet again in that kind of classic geisha sense, but not necessarily as strong or maybe sweet as I was hoping for. Day 40, back through the Chemex, and this is the best day it had been up to this point, and it's kind of an interesting reason why, and this is why I settled on liking it best with the standard recipe as well as the Chemex. The entirety of the cup just actually felt a little bit more balanced, as it wasn't skewing very heavily in the passion fruit direction. And if I had to define this coffee in one word, I would say that it was passion fruit, because that was by far the most consistent and dominant factor in this coffee. And at this moment, I actually kind of wanted to tone it down and experience some other of the aspects that were supposed to be in this coffee. And this time I got a little bit of this complementary white flower to the cup. The brightness was slightly toned down, which was a good thing. I wasn't necessarily enjoying the brightness on the past couple of days up to that point. And the cup does have a slightly more candied floral component to it, as well as a citric finish upon the cool down. So I think there was a little bit more complexity, which wasn't something I was necessarily experiencing from the earlier days. Getting that complexity definitely seemed to help. Day 43, final notes, we have another day through the V60, and it just feels like it's lacking in general, as it feels almost too delicate without great focus or complexity at this time. I can't necessarily tell what went wrong on this because the first couple of days were really, really nice, but this has been my kind of gripe with Say's coffee sometimes, is that they can be a little sensitive. They can be sometimes finicky and difficult to work with. It continues to skew a lot more in the passion fruit direction, and I'm struggling to get too much else from this cup. There is a slight secondary floral component to it, but that's again the experience I'm having with this coffee right here on day 47. So it's just made the end of this coffee not quite as good as the start of it. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. All right, and 2 level 5, so let's go through those real quick. The cleanliness level 5. Yes, however, I have to say this because it's not quite as clean as I've experienced from so many other Panamanian geishas. It definitely justifies that level 5 mark. Very, very clean cup of coffee, but not to the same extent. It doesn't have quite as defined of a flavor profile to the cup. So I still think it's there at that level 5, but if anything, it's maybe on the lower side right there in the middle of that level 5, as opposed to some really, really clean coffees we've had. Berry fruit, level 5. Technically, passion fruit is a berry, so that's why it's going right into that berry fruit category, and there's nothing more to say about that. It's been very consistent, very defined for the entire duration of this coffee. Now we have a bunch of level 4s. So we will start with the finish, level 4. Even with that very strong flavor profile, it doesn't necessarily have a very long-lasting aspect to it. And I figured with there's supposed to be a bergamot note here, I figured maybe that kind of herbality, that kind of citric component might be more lasting in this cup. However, it wasn't, and this coffee finishes just kind of even. And there are times where I was having issues where I could say it was on the lower side of level 4, but I think the finish being there at that level 4 mark is about right for this coffee. Sweetness, level 4. Yes, I don't think I have anything more to say about that either, because it was kind of right there in the middle of the mark. The earlier days, given just how strong and sweet that passion fruit was, you may have been able to justify bumping it up higher side of level 4, maybe the level 5, but towards the end I would say the cup did kind of balance itself out, and that level 4 seems about right. Acidity, level 4. Yes, there were times where the brightness was a little bit more defining and a little bit more pronounced in the cup. That was also a little inconsistent. Those things had been a little inconsistent throughout, the sweetness and the acidity, so it changed, but I was tinkering with this coffee a lot, so I guess that's probably why I could say that. Level 4 seems good though. Same with the florality, and that was maybe the more tricky part of this coffee. They have listed jasmine and honeysuckle. At no time would I ever say that either of those two components were very defined in this coffee. I've had a lot of coffees that have a very sharp honeysuckle and coffees that have had a very sharp jasmine to it. This coffee didn't really seem to showcase those in a very pronounced manner for me very well. It was a little bit more generic of a white flower component to it. So that's why it reached that level 4. And then the final level 4 we have is the citrus at the level 4. Again, not necessarily the most defined citrus. I was fully expecting a lot of the bergamot, which is a note I've had in so many coffees that comes out very clear, very defined. Like, I know what these flavor profiles are supposed to taste like, given just how frequently I've had them, but I couldn't say that I was ever able to pull them out or get them as well defined in this cup of coffee. Last thing we should discuss, the body being there at that level 1, classic Panamanian geisha, especially considering this was probably made with the Chemex. It was made with the Chemex, so of course the body's going to be on the lower side of things. Caramel at that level 2, that's mostly to showcase the kind of candied component I was getting from the florality. But I actually quite like the way that this tasting wheel looks. I think it's pretty accurate from what I was getting for the majority of this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I've said a lot that expectations can really hurt a coffee, and I think that's what might have happened with this coffee right here. I went into it with sky-high expectations, and while I was impressed with the first couple of tries, I don't think I was ever able to replicate that first experience. And even if I was actually getting a little bored of that first experience. I wanted a lot more from this coffee. I wanted to be able to pull out all of these things, and it could be my fault for not being able to get this coffee right and pull them out. However, I just kind of feel like this is the way this coffee is in general. I have heard some others' feedback on this coffee too, and they said it's good, but given the expectations they went into this coffee with as well, they didn't necessarily see the same sort of things. Like, they wanted more from this coffee. So I don't think it was necessarily me. I just think that maybe this is the way this coffee is in general. So not necessarily my favorites. I've definitely enjoyed some of their other Panamanian geishas a little bit more in the past. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you really like passion fruit, this has a wonderfully defined passion fruit aspect to it. Not only is it in the grounds, but it's very much in the brew and definitely present within the cup. So you can definitely feel a lot of that throughout the entirety of drinking this coffee. Still offers wonderful clarity, still has great sweetness to it. And for the most part, it's a pretty well balanced coffee in terms of geishas. It has the traditional geisha-like components to it. Maybe not necessarily the same sort of florality or complexity that you're looking for, but even then it does offer a very clean, sweet, and fruit-forward cup. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, we'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Lote Lino wash process Panama from Say Coffee. Thank you for watching.